A hush fell over the exclusive restaurant in Midtown Manhattan the moment he walked in. Charles Lancaster III, the self-made millionaire known for his brash business deals and lavish lifestyle, sat down at a private booth for an impromptu meal. No one dared approach him until a timid waitress extended a menu with trembling hands. Then it happened. Charles noticed a small, crescent-shaped birthmark on the young woman's wrist. It was the exact replica of the one he had never forgotten, etched in his memory from the past. Suddenly the millionaire's entire world lurched. He demanded a DNA test on the spot. Charles Lancaster III was by his own definition a man forged by ambition. He didn't inherit a fortune. He built it from scratch first, by dabbling in real estate in Chicago's upcoming neighborhoods, then later by diversifying into tech startups in Silicon Valley. After a single venture skyrocketed, he stepped into the limelight. He made appearances on TV shows and had a small cameo on a documentary about entrepreneurs interviewed by none other than Elon Musk's then associate. But for all his wealth and stature, Charles harbored a deep, unspoken wound. Those who knew him best whispered about an incident from long ago, something that had shaped his guarded personality. His success story was an emblem of the American dream, yet his personal life was marred by secrecy and rumors. At 45, he was unmarried, with no recognized children or close family to speak of. Acquaintances gossiped that once in his 20s, he had been involved in a complicated situation that ended abruptly. Many believed it involved a woman named Julia Chambers, someone who vanished from Charles's social circles without a trace. No official record of marriage existed, and Charles refused to speak publicly about his romantic past. He occasionally donated to charities, particularly those involving children, but he was more known for power lunches with business titans like Bill Gates and closed-door negotiation sessions with foreign investors. His philanthropic activities, though sizable, were overshadowed by his reputation for being a ruthless negotiator. Yet beneath the surface, Charles carried a quiet desperation to mend an old regret that gnawed at him every time he closed a deal or added another million to his net worth. Little did he know that on one ordinary evening in Midtown, he would come face to face with a possible link to that regret, a birthmark. A swirl of memory in the shape of a crescent burned into his mind from a distant past would force him to confront the very secret he had spent his life keeping under lock and key. Avenue 23 was a discreet, high-end eatery tucked into one of Manhattan's priciest streets, owned by a consortium that prided itself on secrecy. It was the favorite haunt of celebrities and political figures who wanted to dine without prying eyes. That night, the atmosphere was particularly subdued. The house pianist played soft jazz, a polite hush. Blanketed conversations and elegant chandeliers cast golden glows across crisp white table linens. Alison Smith was on a double shift that night. 24 years old, she had been working at Avenue 23 for just a few months. She needed the money to cover her mother's medical bills, and she'd heard that the tips at this exclusive restaurant were astronomical if she could keep up with the demanding clientele. Her shift had gone uneventfully until the hostess Marcella had quietly nudged her and gestured toward the man sitting in the secluded booth. Everyone recognized Charles Lancaster III, even if they had never served him before. His presence was announced by the hush of staff members, scurrying to ensure everything was immaculate. Alison took a deep breath and approached with the menu. She extended it to him with a polite smile, trying to hide her nerves. The moment Charles looked up, Alison felt a jolt of electricity. His gaze flickered to her wrist, where her small crescent-shaped birthmark peeked out from beneath her uniform sleeve. There was something unsettling in his stare, as though he'd just seen a ghost. She pulled her hand away, self-conscious of the mark that she usually forgot she even had. But Charles kept looking, slowly as if in a trance. He asked her name. "Alison," she said, clearing her throat. "Alison Smith, sir." His voice shook slightly as he asked, "That birthmark? Where did you get it?" She blinked, uncertain how to answer such a strange question. "I was born with it." A wave of incomprehensible emotion flashed in Charles's eyes. That was the exact shape, he was sure of it. Over the years, Charles had thought about that birthmark more times than he cared to admit. It belonged to the baby girl he had once believed was lost to him. The memory was hazy but unforgettable. Nearly 2 decades ago, he had been involved with a woman named Julia Chambers from Kansas City. She was a quiet, thoughtful person, someone who didn't quite fit into his bustling entrepreneurial world. They'd met during a conference in Denver. Introduced by a mutual friend, Julia was intelligent, with a sharp wit that both challenged and excited him. Their romance burned quickly, intense and passionate, and ended almost as swiftly under a cloud of confusion. Before Charles could make sense of it, Julia disappeared. Later rumors reached him that she'd been pregnant. Some said she'd gone to California. Others claimed she wanted nothing from him, not even financial support. Charles tried to track her down, but it was like chasing a ghost. To this day, no one had confirmed whether Julia had actually had the baby. But Charles had held on to a fleeting memory. Julia once mentioned her own mother having a distinctive crescent birthmark, a trait that apparently ran in the family. Charles had dismissed it at the time, just an interesting tidbit. But after Julia vanished, whenever he saw children, he'd notice if they bore anything resembling that mark. He never let it go. Now there it was, etched on Alison's wrist. The shape was identical to the one he remembered seeing in old photographs Julia had shown him, inherited from her maternal lineage. He felt all the air leave his lungs as the possibility took root in his mind. Could this be Julia's daughter? Could this be his daughter? He stared at Alison, who seemed more perplexed with each passing second. He needed answers immediately. Alison had never been confronted about her birthmark in such an intense way before. Sure, occasionally someone would notice it and say, "That's an interesting shape," but she'd learned to shrug it off. Yet this imposing, wealthy man in the tailored suit was staring like it was the key to a life-or-death puzzle. Charles felt the weight of the entire restaurant's gaze settling on him. The hostess Marcella hovered nearby, concerned. Other waitstaff whispered among themselves, unsure if they should intervene. Finally, Charles broke the tension, his voice low but urgent. "I'm sorry to be so forward. This is extremely important. Do you know your parents' names?" A flush of anger rippled through Alison. "Excuse me," she said, trying to maintain her composure. She was used to arrogant customers, but this was invasive. "I'm sorry, sir, but that's personal." Charles exhaled sharply. He realized he was making a scene, and that wasn't his intention. Lowering his voice further, he said, "I need to talk to you in private." He slid a sleek business card across the table. "Please contact me when you're off your shift, This is about something I can't just let go." Alison snatched the card, confusion still etched across her features. She glanced down at it. Lancaster Industries. It read with his name and personal number in embossed letters. She stammered an apology, stepping back from the table. She had a job to do, bills to pay, and no space in her life for this kind of strange confrontation. Still a part of her, an odd, nagging curiosity, couldn't ignore how serious he seemed. Why was he so focused on her birthmark that night, As she continued to serve other guests, she felt Charles's eyes on her. He left earlier than she expected, without eating, and left behind a tip so large it almost made her faint. Tucked under the bills was a handwritten note. "You might be my daughter. Please call me." Alison's hands trembled as she read the note. She quickly stuffed it in her apron, scanning the restaurant to ensure no one else had seen. After her shift ended, she slipped out the back door into the cool Manhattan night, her thoughts in turmoil. The city was alive with the usual bustle, car horns, neon lights, tourists chattering, but Alison felt strangely detached from it all. Her mother, Anna Smith, had never spoken about Alison's father in detail. She always said he left before Alison was born, with no further explanation. Over time, Alison stopped asking questions, not wanting to upset her mother or dredge up painful memories. Still, she'd always felt the absence, the what-if that haunted her whenever classmates at school brought their dads to events. Could this Charles Lancaster III truly be that missing piece? It sounded absurd, yet the note was in her pocket, and the recollection of his urgency was still fresh. He hadn't seemed like a madman, but he was definitely intense. Alison rummaged in her purse for her phone. She felt almost compelled to call. After a few minutes of pacing, she dialed. Part of her expected him not to pick up. It was already late. "But he did, Alison," he said, voice hushed as if he'd been waiting by the phone. She took a breath, gathering her courage. "What do you want from me?" A pause. Just a chance to explain. "Please meet me tomorrow. We can talk properly." She hesitated. Something in his voice held a quiet desperation that made her chest tighten. She agreed, if only to quell her own curiosity, but she laid down ground rules: a public place during the daytime, and no cameras or weird setups. Charles agreed to everything. Before he ended the call, he repeated one line that made Alison's heart pound. "Thank you. I've been waiting for a moment like this for nearly 25 years." The next day they met at a small cafe near Central Park, somewhere neutral and unassuming. The morning sun cast dappled light through the leafy trees onto the sidewalk tables. Alison arrived early and found a seat. She tapped her foot anxiously, scanning every face that passed by. She told Marcella, her co-worker, where she was going in case anything went awry, but part of her still wondered if she was making a huge mistake. Charles arrived exactly on time, wearing casual slacks and a polo shirt, looking oddly vulnerable for a man typically swathed in power suits. He offered a small, nervous smile. After ordering coffees, there was a moment of excruciating silence before Charles finally spoke. He told her about Julia Chambers, her sharp mind, her gentle demeanor, and how she'd disappeared. He explained the rumors, his frantic search, the heartbreak he felt when he couldn't find her. "I never had confirmation that she had a child," Charles murmured, wrapping his hands around his coffee cup. "But I always suspected it." Alison listened, her heart pounding. Could her mother be this Julia Chambers? She'd never heard that name before, but that didn't mean anything. Her mother had always been an intensely private person, especially regarding her past. Then Charles pulled out a worn photo. Julia smiling, wearing a summer dress, standing next to a younger Charles. It was dated over 20 years ago, but the resemblance to Alison's own features was uncanny. Her breath caught in her throat. "I'm not here to force a relationship or intrude on your life," Charles said, voice trembling. "I just need to know if you are my daughter. If you're not, I'll never bother you again. But if you are, I owe you everything. And I owe Julia an apology. I can never fully deliver." Alison said nothing, but she knew she couldn't walk away now. Some part of her needed the truth too. Charles proposed a DNA test offering to pay for everything and arrange it with total discretion. Alison initially balked at the idea. She didn't even know this man. Could she trust him to handle something so sensitive? Yet logic told her that if there was a chance this was her father, she would want confirmation. So she reluctantly agreed on condition. She got to choose the testing center. By nightfall, Alison was back in her tiny shared apartment, staring at a slip of paper with an appointment time for the DNA lab. She felt like her world had turned upside down in less than 24 hours. Thoughts swirled. If Charles was her father, what did that mean for her life going forward? She could barely make rent, and her mother's medical bills piled up daily. Would Charles swoop in and fix everything? And did she even want that? She called her mother, who was staying at a care facility in upstate New York. The conversation was guarded. Anna only said she didn't recognize the name Julia Chambers at all, and that she had her reasons for leaving Alison's father out of the picture. She didn't explain further, pleading exhaustion. Alison sighed, frustration mounting. Her mother's secrecy was maddening, but it wasn't a new dynamic. Anna had always been reticent about the past. Before she drifted to sleep, Alison recalled the single time Anna mentioned Alison's father was someone who couldn't be there. She had always assumed he was just uninterested or irresponsible. Now she wasn't so sure. The test loomed promising answers, but also threatening to unravel the only life she'd ever known. A week later, Alison and Charles waited in a quiet corridor of the reputable Hudson Diagnostic Lab. Charles had arrived early, dressed in an understated suit, determined to keep the occasion as respectful as possible. Alison arrived with apprehension written all over her face. The lab technician swabbed their cheeks, double-checking their identification, and assured them results would be emailed in a few days. The tension during the procedure was palpable. Charles tried making small talk about inconsequential things: her favorite music, her hobbies, whether she liked living in the city. Alison answered politely, but gave little away. After all, she still had no certainty if this man was truly connected to her by blood or if he was caught up in a bizarre coincidence. Over the next 3 days, Charles found himself checking his email obsessively, heart pounding every time a new message appeared. He couldn't focus on work, despite pressing negotiations with potential international partners. He was set to fly to Tokyo for a groundbreaking real estate deal, but he rescheduled everything at the last minute. His personal assistants were baffled, but he offered no explanation. Meanwhile, Alison went about her shifts at Avenue 23, ignoring the hushed whispers that circulated after the scene Charles had caused. Only Marcella knew the full story, and even then, only bits and pieces. The weight was excruciating. Both Charles and Alison felt an undercurrent of anxiety that either threatened a moment of euphoria or heartbreak. When the lab results finally arrived, they both hesitated to open them with trembling hands. Alison clicked on the email attachment. Seconds passed like hours as her eyes darted across the PDF. She felt her heart nearly stop. Then she looked at Charles, who was reading the same email on his phone from across the table. Their gazes locked, and the reality sank in. The DNA test said Charles Lancaster III was a 99.99% match. Alison couldn't speak. She stared at the words on the screen. Paternity positive. She had played out 1,000 scenarios in her head. Maybe it was a fluke, maybe just a coincidence, maybe it was an error. But the data was right there, scientifically undeniable. Charles Lancaster III was her biological father. Charles felt a wave of relief and dread crash over him. So many lost years, so many unanswered questions. He wanted to rejoice, to pull her into a hug, to do anything to acknowledge this monumental news, but her expression was a mix of shock, confusion, and maybe even betrayal. "Why didn't you look for me earlier?" Alison whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "If you suspected, why wait until now?" Charles's voice wobbled. "I tried. I looked for Julia Chambers. I hired investigators, but she vanished. No leads. No forwarding address. Not even a phone number. I assumed she didn't want me to be part of your life." Alison blinked back, tears, anger simmering beneath. "Well, she changed her name to Anna Smith. I guess that's how you never found her." She pulled in a shaky breath. "But why show up at my workplace and demand a DNA test?" "The second you saw me," he reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "I recognized that birthmark," he said softly. "Julia told me it ran in her family. I couldn't just walk away, knowing what that might mean." The weight of the revelation pressed down on them like a suffocating blanket, as father and daughter stared at each other for the first time in their confirmed roles, an entire tapestry of lost milestones. Regrets and possible futures hung in the balance. The next few days were an emotional roller coaster. Alison avoided returning Charles's calls, needing space to think. She found herself hiding in the walk-in cooler at Avenue 23, just to breathe her mind, spinning with newly discovered truths. Marcella caught her, once eyes wide, and quietly slid her a cup of calming herbal tea, offering silent support. Meanwhile, Charles struggled with a whirlwind of paternal instincts he'd never felt before. He bombarded Alison's phone with voicemails, each a gentle plea to talk things over. He wanted to make amends, to fill the gap of 24 years in some miraculous way. But how could he? Money couldn't buy back time. Alison, torn and confused, finally decided she needed to confront the real source of the secrets her mother. Taking the train upstate, she arrived at the care facility where Anna Smith had recently been staying. The facility was modest, and the staff was friendly, greeting Alison warmly, asking how she was holding up. She forced a smile, 1,000 questions lodged in her throat. When Anna saw Alison in the visitation lounge, her face lit up, but she quickly sensed her daughter's turmoil. They sat by a window overlooking a small garden. Alison held her mother's hand, noticing how frail it felt. "Mom," she began, her voice quivering. "I need you to tell me everything. The man I thought never existed. He's real. Charles Lancaster. He found me. And apparently, you're Julia Chambers." Anna's eyes widened, tears forming instantly. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. All the lies, the silence, Alison could feel them hovering in the room, waiting to burst into 1,000 shards of truth. Anna Julia gripped her daughter's hand, tears streaking her cheeks. She hadn't expected to hold on to this secret forever. It was just easier to keep quiet than to deal with the messy consequences. But now the reckoning was here. She told Alison the entire story. At 21, Julia Chambers had met Charles Lancaster at a conference in Denver. She was there as an intern, working under a mentor who recognized her potential. Charles was already charismatic and ambitious, and the attraction was immediate. Their romance burned hot and fast, maybe too fast by the time Julia discovered she was pregnant. Charles was wrapped up in a high-stakes real estate deal, traveling non-stop and rarely returning her calls. Julia, never one to beg, left him, a message revealing her pregnancy. When he didn't respond quickly, she panicked. She assumed he was too busy or uninterested. Feeling abandoned, she decided to leave. She adopted the name Anna Smith, hoping to bury her past. She believed that Charles was too driven to care about a child. The heartbreak of him not calling back convinced her to sever ties for good. Alison's tears flowed freely as she heard how a simple missed call had changed the course of her entire life. Anna sobbed too, confessing that she'd regretted her assumption for years. But by the time she contemplated reaching out, Charles had become a millionaire celebrity. Fear of rejection and the potential media frenzy kept her silent. "I never wanted to hurt you," Anna whispered, pressing Alison's hand to her chest. "I thought I was protecting you from disappointment. His world was so different from ours." Alison's mind swirled. One phone call, a miscommunication. The entire tragedy of her missing father hinged on that. The frustration and heartbreak she'd been harboring melted into a sorrowful understanding. That night, Alison called Charles from the guest lounge in the care facility, her voice thick with emotion. She recounted Anna's story, the missing phone call, the heartbreak. Charles listened in stunned silence, grappling with the knowledge that he never actually heard Julia's desperate voicemail all those years ago. He guessed it must have been lost amidst business calls, overshadowed by urgent financial crises. A mixture of relief and regret coursed through him. At least he hadn't willingly abandoned them, but the magnitude of what was lost felt immeasurable. He asked to speak with Anna. There was a long pause as Alison weighed the request, glancing at her mother's frail figure in a corner chair. Finally, Anna nodded, and Alison handed her the phone. Julia Charles's voice was almost childlike, trembling with emotion. Anna exhaled slowly, tears falling again, as she listened to the man she once loved apologize haltingly for not being there, for failing to protect her, for failing their daughter. Hours later, the phone conversation ended, but a new beginning felt possible. Charles made plans to visit upstate. He wanted to see Anna in person, to atone for the decades that slipped by. Alison didn't know how to feel, torn between lingering resentment and the undeniable swell of hope. She realized that her life had been forever altered. She stood by the facility's dimly lit window, watching the moon reflect on a small koi pond. So many questions still buzzed in her mind. Would she move forward with Charles in her life? Could Anna and Charles find closure after all this time? And how would she, Alison, navigate a future now tangled with wealth, secrets, and potential scandal? Days later, Charles's limousine pulled up to the modest care facility. Staff members whispered excitedly when they realized who he was. Alison stood on the front porch, arms folded. She was still wary, but there was a pang of sympathy watching him step out of the vehicle, bouquet in hand. This larger-than-life businessman now suddenly so vulnerable. He greeted Alison gently, then followed her inside to Anna's room. As he entered, his breath caught. Anna sat in a rocking chair by the window, the golden afternoon sun illuminating her pale cheeks. She looked older, frailer, but unmistakably the woman he remembered, the woman he had once loved. He offered her the flowers, but the moment they locked eyes, they both wept. Words flowed between them, apologies, explanations, and confessions of what might have been. They spoke about the intervening years, how Anna raised Alison on her own, how she lied about her identity to keep safe from the illusions she believed about Charles. In turn, Charles detailed his frantic but fruitless search, how he'd blamed himself for not doing enough. Alison hovered near the doorway, tears welling up. She suddenly felt like an intruder on a private reunion, yet she was at the heart of it. As she leaned against the cool wall, a wave of empathy rushed over her. Yes, secrets had been kept, Mistakes had been made. But in that tender moment, seeing her parents reconnect after so long, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe they could find a way forward together, even if it was years late. After that emotional reunion, Charles extended an invitation for Alison to visit his estate in the Hamptons for a weekend, just to talk and see if they could build a relationship. Alison hesitated. She was used to a humble existence, fiercely independent, scraping by to pay bills. Stepping into the lavish world of a millionaire, father felt surreal, like a story ripped from a tabloid. However, Anna encouraged her. Go see who he is. Alison, maybe it's not too late for you two to have something real. So Alison boarded the train on a crisp Saturday morning. She arrived at a gleaming property overlooking the Atlantic. Its manicured gardens and glistening infinity pool screamed wealth and privilege. She felt wildly out of place in her second-hand denim jacket, but Charles greeted her warmly. He gave her a tour, pointing out the artwork he'd collected, the library stacked with books on finance art and personal memoirs. Every corner echoed with the success he'd achieved, but also the solitude he'd lived in. They spent hours talking. Charles asked about her dreams, her ambitions. Alison admitted she had aspirations of becoming a journalist one day. But life's responsibilities had derailed those plans. He listened enthralled by each detail, apologizing whenever he sensed how difficult life had been. That night, they dined on the patio, the sea breeze carrying salty air. Over a candlelit table, father and daughter tried to close the gap of lost years, sharing stories that illustrated who they had become in each other's absence. It felt hopeful, yet bittersweet. Like they were dancing around the fact that time couldn't be rewound. No matter how many resources, Charles had Alison returned to Manhattan with more questions than answers. She and Charles were taking cautious steps, but forging a relationship wasn't as simple as exchanging phone calls. Their worlds were wildly different. Charles had grown accustomed to luxury and immediate solutions to problems, while Alison had learned self-reliance the hard way. The tension was palpable every time he offered to pay off her mother's medical bills or move them both into a bigger apartment. She resisted, uncertain if accepting his help made her a sellout or a dutiful daughter. The lines were blurry, complicated by a lifetime of unspoken yearnings. Meanwhile, the media began circling. Word spread that Charles Lancaster III was seen with a young waitress from Avenue 23. There were whispers of scandal, fatherhood, and inheritance. Though Charles tried to contain the situation by issuing denials or ignoring inquiries, the rumors escalated. Paparazzi once caught Alison leaving her shift, bombarding her with flashes and intrusive questions. Terrified and angry, she ran to the staff, exit tears stinging her eyes. Charles was furious. He threatened legal action against tabloids printing unverified gossip. But in private, he confronted the reality. He was a public figure, and the press had a voracious appetite for any scandal. If Alison truly was his daughter, now confirmed by the DNA test, this story would be unstoppable. In quiet moments, he worried whether bringing her into his life was inadvertently putting her in harm's way. Could he protect her from the media frenzy, and more importantly, from the cynicism of a world that might see her as a gold digger? Alison found solace in routine. She continued her shifts at Avenue 23, ignoring the stares from co-workers who'd read the tabloids. She visited her mother, who was steadily improving, though her condition remained delicate. And every night she spent hours staring at her phone, grappling with whether to call Charles. Part of her wanted to confide in him about every stress, every fear. Another part questioned if she was ready to embrace this new reality, or if she even trusted him. Charles, on the other hand, was in uncharted territory. His life had been a series of calculated risks, investments, mergers, expansions. Family was an investment he had no blueprint for. Unable to figure out how to navigate fatherhood overnight, he sought advice from an unlikely source. Warren Buffett, a friend he'd met through philanthropic circles over a private dinner, Charles confided that he had a personal issue, but didn't elaborate. Warren, wise and fatherly himself, suggested Charles focus on humility and genuine connection rather than quick fixes of money. Realizing the wisdom in this, Charles made smaller gestures. He sent Alison a journal with a note saying he hoped she'd write her thoughts in it. He emailed her links to journalism courses she might consider, rather than offering to pay for them outright. He simply shared the information, letting her lead. It was a measured approach, a hint that he respected her autonomy. Still, both father and daughter felt an aching gap that only time and mutual effort could mend. Then came the unexpected phone call from a high-profile attorney named Malcolm Blythe. Claiming to represent an interested third party, Malcolm insisted there was a legal matter that might affect Alison's newfound paternity status. Confused and alarmed, Alison met with him in his glossy Midtown office. Malcolm explained that a relative of Charles, an estranged cousin, had recently passed away. The cousin's estate was in dispute because of a clause that allocated a significant share to the rightful heir of Charles Lancaster III. With Alison's paternity proven, some unscrupulous extended family members saw her as a threat to their inheritance. They were planning to contest the validity of her parentage in court, spinning theories that she'd fabricated the test results or coerced Charles into a scam. Horrified, Alison felt her stomach churn. She never wanted to be part of any inheritance drama. All she wanted was answers about her father. Now she found herself roped into potential lawsuits, with lawyers questioning her motives and personal history. Malcolm offered to represent her pro bono, suspecting that she was the victim of wealth-driven familial politics. Overwhelmed, Alison left the office in tears. She didn't even know these relatives yet. They viewed her as a hostile claimant to a fortune she had no idea existed. Alone in the elevator, she realized how messy Charles's world could be, and how naive she'd been to think she could wade into it unscathed. Her phone buzzed. It was Charles again. She stared at the caller ID, uncertain whether she had the emotional bandwidth to answer. Finally, she pressed the green button. She needed to tell him everything. This father-daughter relationship, brand new and fragile, was already under siege. Charles was livid when he heard about the potential legal challenge. He arranged a meeting with his own legal team. Determined to nip this in the bud, Alison attended, hesitantly, still unaccustomed to stepping into law offices and boardrooms teeming with power suits. She felt like a small-town girl thrust into a corporate battlefield. At the conference table, attorneys in tailored suits spoke in cryptic legal jargon, discussing motions, depositions, and ways to discredit the cousin's claim. They had strategies, flowcharts, and contingencies. Alison felt claustrophobic, as though she was a pawn in a chess game she didn't understand. Charles, noticing her discomfort, put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I won't let them drag you through the mud," he vowed. "We'll fight back. They can't slander you or question legitimate DNA tests without consequence." Yet she was still conflicted. Was she really prepared to go to war over a fortune she didn't seek or want? The entire scenario felt surreal. She left the meeting feeling drained, her mind swirling with terms like deposition and character testimony. As she stepped outside into the bustling Manhattan streets, bright sunlight and the jostle of pedestrians reminded her how normal life continued around her, oblivious to this storm inside her head. Later, over a private dinner, Charles tried to apologize yet again for dragging her into his complicated world. He offered her a legal safety net and guaranteed that he'd shield her from any fallout. But Alison wasn't sure if she believed it was possible to remain untouched by the chaos that came with being a millionaire's heir. In the midst of legal skirmishes, Alison found an unlikely confidant in Marcella, her co-worker. Late one evening after their shift ended, they sat in the empty restaurant, sipping leftover cappuccinos. Under the soft glow of dimmed chandeliers, Alison poured out her heart about Charles, her mother's past and the inheritance scandal swirling around her. Marcella listened intently, nodding in all the right places. She was the kind of friend who radiated warmth and understanding. "Look," she said, "finally, money changes people, sometimes for good, sometimes for bad. But it doesn't have to change. If Charles is genuine in wanting to be in your life, then maybe this storm will pass, and you'll come out stronger on the other side." Alison sighed. "I hope so. But I feel like I'm caught between two worlds. One where I'm just a waitress, hustling to pay bills, and another where I'm a millionaire's daughter, who might get dragged to court." Marcella reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "That might be your reality now. But who you are doesn't have to shift in the wind. Ground yourself. Remember the truths that shaped you before all this happened." Inspired by Marcella's words, Alison decided she needed to focus on something that gave her life meaning, her mother's well-being and her own dreams of journalism. She wasn't going to abandon either. She resolved that no matter what storms came, she'd stay true to herself. Even if the entire world labeled her differently, she would remain Alison Smith, daughter of Anna Smith, and yes, maybe also the daughter of Charles Lancaster III. One brisk morning, Alison had a hearing scheduled. The cousin's estate lawyer had filed a motion demanding a re-evaluation of the DNA test and a court-supervised test for authenticity. Charles, furious, had prepared an opposing argument with his legal team. Alison arrived wearing a borrowed business suit, her heart hammering in her chest. She'd never set foot in a courtroom before. The hearing was a tense affair. Across the aisle sat distant relatives of Charles, faces Alison had never seen, but who glared at her as though she were some interloper. Their attorney claimed that Alison might be capitalizing on a fabricated test and suggested that Charles was complicit in a scheme to disrupt the estate distribution. The allegations made Alison's blood boil, but she managed to keep her composure. Charles's head attorney fired back, presenting the lab's credentials and reaffirming the 99.99% paternity match. He reminded the court that Charles had not made any inheritance claim on Alison's behalf. This was purely a case of verifying paternity, a private matter that had already been resolved. The judge, unimpressed by the cousin's conspiracy theories, ordered a formal verification of the lab's process, but stated that the initial results were valid, pending any proven evidence of fraud. Walking out of the courtroom, Alison exhaled with relief. Charles gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I wish you didn't have to go through this." Alison nodded, tears threatening. For the first time, she felt protected, like Charles was more than just a distant figure. He was present, fighting alongside her. A small flicker of trust ignited in her heart. Over the following weeks, the legal chaos began to settle. The lab's verification came back solid, debunking any rumors of fraud. The judge essentially dismissed the estate's challenge, warning them that further attempts to dispute Alison's paternity without new evidence would be seen as harassment. But just when Alison thought life might calm down, a new twist emerged. Investigative journalists sniffing around the story discovered a sealed birth record from Kansas City. The record confirmed a birth mother named Julia Chambers and a father, Charles L. The sensational headline read, "Charles Lancaster III's secret daughter, confirmed by leaked hospital records." Suddenly, the rumor was official news. Social media exploded with commentary, some supportive, some cruel. Gold digger or long-lost daughter splashed across tabloids. Paparazzi hounded the care facility upstate, pestering Anna for a statement. The staff had to install extra security measures. The entire situation felt suffocating. Charles determined to protect his daughter, and her mother issued a press release. He acknowledged that Alison was indeed his daughter, stating, "We have only recently discovered this truth and ask for privacy as we navigate this personal journey." Yet the press was relentless. Alison felt like she was living in a fishbowl. She hated the invasive questions shouted at her on the street, the camera flashes that blinded her, the ugly messages on her social media. At her wits' end, she considered returning to Kansas City to get away from the madness. But she couldn't leave Anna, and her job was here. Her life was here. One night, Charles called voice heavy. "I'm taking steps to manage the media, but I need to know, do you want to stay, or should I help you relocate somewhere safer?" Alison closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I don't want to run forever. I just want a normal life." Determined not to let the tabloids control their narrative, Charles and Alison devised a plan. They would grant one exclusive interview to a reputable journalist. Someone with integrity, tell their story in their own words, and then refuse further commentary. Charles hoped it would quell the frenzy and set the record straight once and for all. They chose Rachel Byrne from a respected news network. Rachel had won awards for her empathetic interviews, tackling sensitive topics with dignity. In a quiet corner of Charles's Hamptons estate, with only a cameraman and an assistant present, Charles and Alison sat side by side under a large oak tree. Alison was visibly nervous, fidgeting with the cuff of her sleeve. Charles squeezed her hand in reassurance. Rachel's questions began gently asking about Alison's upbringing, her mother, and the moment she met Charles. Alison spoke in a trembling voice, at first, but gradually found her footing, explaining the confusion that led to her father's absence. Charles, for his part, admitted his regret. He confessed he was too caught up in business, acknowledging he had no idea that a single missed phone call could change everything. When asked about money inheritance and the cousins' drama, Charles's gaze hardened. "This is not about money," he said. "It's about finding my daughter after 2 decades. The rest is noise." Rachel wrapped up the interview with a question about the future. Did they see themselves forging a genuine family bond? Alison's voice trembled again, but she looked at Charles and said, "I want us to try. We've lost so much time already." The camera cut tears glistening in the corners of Rachel's eyes. It was a heartfelt moment, captured honestly, and one that would soon be broadcast to millions. The interview aired a week later, and the public response was surprisingly supportive. After seeing Alison's genuine demeanor and hearing Charles's remorse, many people who had labeled her a gold digger retracted their harsh comments. Tabloid speculation calmed, replaced by more empathetic commentary on the complexities of lost family connections. Meanwhile, Anna's health took a turn for the better. With some of the settlement money Charles discreetly arranged, Anna was able to receive advanced treatments. She began physical therapy sessions that improved her mobility, and her doctors were cautiously optimistic about her long-term prognosis. During her recovery, Anna Julia found closure as well. She had an emotional conversation with Charles about their past. They shared apologies and even an old photograph or two. Though they didn't expect to rekindle a romantic relationship, they reached a peaceful understanding. Alison, bolstered by public sympathy, returned to normalcy. She kept her waitressing job for a while, despite Charles urging her to consider focusing on her education full-time. Eventually she realized she could trust him enough to accept help in furthering her dreams. She enrolled in a reputable journalism program, part-time, determined to carve out a future that reflected her values and aspirations. Charles, for the first time in his life, found genuine fulfillment beyond business success. He flew less for corporate deals, choosing instead to be close to Alison and Anna. They shared Sunday brunches, visited museums, and tried to experience the day-to-day life they'd missed out on. For Charles, it wasn't about repairing lost time, no one could fix that, but about building something honest and enduring. For Alison, it was about learning that she could hold on to her independent spirit while still letting someone care for her. The media storm had passed, and in its wake was a fragile but hopeful bridge between father and daughter. Months turned into a year. By then, the memory of paparazzi chases and courtroom battles felt distant, replaced by smaller, more meaningful moments. Alison graduated from her part-time journalism program. With honors, Charles attended the ceremony, beaming from the audience. He tried not to overshadow the event, intentionally sitting in a back row to keep the focus on her. Anna's health stabilized, and she moved into a comfortable apartment near the city. Charles's subtle financial support ensured she'd never worry about medical bills again, though Anna insisted on paying what she could from her own savings. Charles never wavered in his willingness to help. Gradually, the bitterness of the past melted away, replaced by mutual respect. Alison, now armed with new confidence, landed an internship at a respected online news publication. In her first investigative piece, she wrote about the pitfalls of wealth, drawing heavily from her own experiences, with anonymity intact. The essay gained critical acclaim for its empathy and insight, though she chose to publish it under the name Alison Smith to maintain a semblance of normalcy. During a small celebration dinner after her piece went viral, Charles raised a toast, tears shining in his eyes. To Alison, my daughter, against all odds you've shown the world who you are, compassionate, intelligent, and unstoppable. I'm so proud of you. Alison smiled through misty eyes, heart full. They had journeyed from strangers, separated by secrets, to a family imperfect, but bound by truth and love. The birthmark that once triggered a whirlwind of drama had guided them all toward healing. Sometimes Alison looked down at her wrist, remembering the night Charles first saw it, and demanded a DNA test. It felt like a lifetime ago, yet it was the catalyst that set everything in motion, leading them here together at last. And there you have it, the incredible twisting tale of how one brief glimpse at a waitress's birthmark unraveled 2 decades of buried secrets. From missed phone calls and mistaken identities, to heartfelt reunions, and a long-overdue father-daughter bond, Charles Lancaster III and Alison Smith overcame a storm of media attention and legal challenges, yet in the end, they found what had eluded them, both a genuine family connection. If this story moved you, if it made you gasp, cry, or cheer, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who loves a good real-life drama, and subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories. Your support helps us bring you the most captivating narratives that remind us all. Sometimes the smallest details can spark the biggest life changes. Thank you for watching.